Hello, welcome to the Prog Connection. I am your host, Zoltán Vamos, and this is our group. We have Bryan Vamos over here and John Lance. We are the Prog Connection. Shall we introduce ourselves? Dad, how about you start us off, please?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm Bryan Vamos. I play keyboards in the progressive rock band Benjamin's Kite.
Yeah, I've been
Zoltan's father.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a long history of playing and listening to progressive rock music. Zoltan?
John, yourself?
Me, progressive rock collector since the age of about 17. How I got into prog was I met a friend that lived down the road who loaned me a couple of albums, Dream Theater, Yngwie Malmsteen, Steve Vai, and then I discovered Flower King through Transatlantic, and an Inside Out ever, and the rest was history. That's a short version of how I got into prog.
But Zoltan,
Mm-hmm.
would you say, John, you're in Florida, right?
Yeah, Florida.
So Zoltan and I are outside of Toronto, Canada.
Yeah.
Are you on the west coast or east coast of Florida?
I'm on the northeast,
Northeast. Okay.
the top panhandle, like right in. Unlike the last exit before Georgia.
All right, there you go. So, do we have anything else we would like to add?
I'm good, Zilly.
All right. So, I would like to switch subjects very fast and move on to our top 5 favorite progressive rock albums, please. Or prog albums, albums labeled under the progressive label, I guess you could say, right? So, why not we start off with Dad, who started us off with the introductions. Dad?
Well, Zilly, you said 5, right?
Yes. That is correct. I want to do 5.
Okay, so I always find it when there's lists of 10 or 5 that it's very hard when you have to throw bands or albums completely out because you have it limited down to 5. And I know we said perhaps we wouldn't do honorable mentions or anything like that, but when it gets down to the top 5, I find it difficult to throw, a Jethro Tull or a Van de Graaff generator out.
Yeah. So,
but I had no choice.
Yeah.
And so I will pick as number 5. I will pick Rush Permanent Waves.
All right, good album. Very prog album. I want to hear your opinion and why.
Yeah, I mean, I really do love the Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres that come before that, but for some reason I think the sound that Rush had in those days, they really put it together on Permanent Waves and really solidified their sound, and they didn't lose any of the progressive rock that they had on Hemispheres and Farewell to Kings, and they just made it more concise. And I also think that Geddy sang more within his own range, because there in the early Rush, there is a tendency to compare it to Led Zeppelin, and perhaps people thought that Geddy was singing very high to copy Robert Plant. I don't think he sounded like Robert Plant, but he was singing high up into the sort of John Anderson range, and sometimes he was perhaps a little bit forcing himself to go up to high notes that were, not naturally within his range. And I know if you see various interviews with Rush from that time, there was, they thought about that, and there was a concerted effort for him to sing within a range that was more natural to his voice. And I may be in a minority, but I actually think that Geddy Lee, especially when he's singing normal, has a pretty pleasant voice. I actually like the sound of his voice, so I think Permanent Waves, maybe I like it a bit better just because I do like the singing on it. I think he sings very well.
Might be in the minority there.
Yeah, that's what I said. I might be,
Yeah.
but I prefer when he sings in his natural voice over trying to scream to sound like Robert Plant,
I can
right?
understand to a
If
point,
that's what he was trying to do on the
I
earlier
suppose,
ones.
but
I think there was a little bit of that, but just influence. I think they're also influenced by the Who, so trying to get to those
yeah.
notes that maybe Roger Daltrey could get to or whatever, right? And chasing really high singing when it's not really naturally in his range.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like the way the songs are concise on Permanent Waves, and I think they really captured how they sounded, but in nice, uh, digestible bits. So I mean, that's my favorite album. So
Yeah.
I'll go with number 5 as Permanent Waves.
John?
Number 5 for me would be King Crimson, the album Islands.
Great pick.
Really odd why out of all those. I'm not really a big King Crimson fan. I do love Islands because it's a lot different. It's more pastoral. The way I discovered this album actually kind of has a short story to it. My mother used to be a secretary of a church, and our church is the only church in our city and county that ran the homeless shelter. And there was a person in the back because I used to bring my little radio. This is back when I had XM radio, and King Crimson came on, and he was like singing the lyrics to whatever the Formatera lady, I think it was. Oh, no, the song Islands, the last song on the albums came on. He was singing to him like, you notice, like, oh yeah. And then he started getting into naming that's like his favorite Crimson album. To keep a long story short, it's just not my cup of tea. The other Crimson albums, I do like parts of Thrack. But to me, if I'm gonna listen to Crimson, I prefer the stuff like bands that are like it more on the instrumental side. I've always been a person who loves like the bands who kind of sound like the main band because they sound a little bit different, like a cover band, but not a cover band. Like you have the Watch, which sounds like Genesis, but King Crimson Islands would be number 5 for me, just because it's just held a special place in my heart for years. And the vocals on that album is the only album that has that singer on it, and I had no idea whatever happened to that singer. Robert Fripp taught, I guess, the guy how to play the bass. Also, on I don't remember the guy's name that's sung on the album because I don't have the album in front of me at the moment. I didn't prep the CDs beforehand, but other than that, yeah, that's number 5, King Crimson Islands.
Very good pick. I decided to switch my 5th from more modern because I have an album from roughly similar sounding band, so I want to kind of spice it up and throw in a little bit of variety. So instead of throwing in a transatlantic album, I will throw in UK's UK. And I will just say, aside from maybe one song on that album, I don't really have very many complaints. You have the entire In the Dead of Night suite, which is practically perfect from that entire group. I mean, you have the John Wetton vocals, who's an icon in not just prog rock, but also in Asia and art pop and progressive pop, I guess you could say. But you also have Alan Holdsworth on that record, who I would say that's some of the best guitar work he's ever done. Eddie Jobson was electric on that album and had those big soaring soundscapes, which influenced my taste in progressive rock music and music in general throughout my entire life. And of course, as much as I wouldn't exactly cite Bill Bruford as a big influence on my drumming sound, I absolutely adore Bill Bruford. I love his drumming work on that album, and the virtuosity and songwriting on that album are top-notch from me, I would say. Dad, number 4.
Number 4.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Brain Salad Surgery.
All right.
I know that's like an obvious choice for a keyboard player.
Yeah.
Because Keith Emerson's kind of the god of progressive rock keyboard playing, but still, it's a great one. So what more can I say about that album? Is absolutely fantastic, and I love everything about it, but I love the keyboard playing in particular. So
Mhm.
it's fantastic. So I'm gonna go. I know I'm the old guy in the crowd, and I'm gonna go with the old prog bands. So
Yeah.
you'll see that's a theme with me. So yeah, ELP, Brain
That's why
Civilization.
we have variety. Anyway, John, 4.
Number four, this is kind of a hard one to say. I would say it would fall in the line of progressive because Goran Edman was on two of the albums, but I'm gonna go with my favorite album, by Swedish guitar maestro. It's kind of like progressive neoclassical metal. Yngwie Malmsteen on the
Mm.
album Alchemy from 1999. That album has Mark Bowles on vocals, and Mark Bowles was on 4 albums, I think, by Yngwie Malmsteen. That album just slaps from start to finish. The guy shreds like no, you would never believe. And Yngwie is an acquired taste because most every album he does begins to sound like one giant guitar solo. But the vocals on that album is how I got into really digging vocals and how albums are made, especially in prog and just the neoclassical and metal movements and hard rock movements that would be kind of categorized with crossover, kind of like Car Mechanic would be like progressive AOR, or Yngwie Malmsteen would be more like neoclassical progressive power metal like Symphony X. So I threw this one into the mix. Yngwie Malmsteen's Alchemy 1999 is my number 4.
All right, that's great. Sorry. And I will go with a bit more of a modern prog album. This one was released about over a decade ago. The Raven That Refused to Sing and Other Stories. Very I would say that album gave a lot of those I guess you could say earlier King Crimson vibes, but mixed it with a little bit of Yes and Genesis and a little bit of all those other guys. But he also mixed it with a lot of his own sound. But it was also Alan Parsons' brilliant production that threw that album into a bit of a collective work of art there in that sense. Pin Drop is very good. Holy Drinker is a little bit on the. I love the song, but I think if I'm going to listen to the album from start to finish, that's probably the only one I might skip, but it's still great. Otherwise, rest of the album in general, it's great from me. Very short, concise, gets to the point. It's on from minute 1 and then it just ends without changing much. So it's consistent from start to finish. Dad, you're number 3?
Okay. I know I'm at the risk of being very predictable.
Oh boy.
I will go for number 3 as Yes, Close to the Edge. Always a classic. Love the album. It's a perfect album to start summer, which is not too far away.
Yeah.
Got the perfect sound for the beginning of summer, so it'll be coming up soon. And yeah, it's a classic. Obviously, Rick Wakeman is one of the great keyboard players of progressive rock, and love his playing on that album. And everybody else plays fantastic as well, and fantastic songs. So yeah, I'll go with that one.
John, your 3rd?
This is kind of a tough one. I kind of don't want to mention two artists, a solo artist with my favorite band is going to be number 1. So I'm going to go with number 3, IQ Dark Matter. I was going to say Thomas Bodine, I Am, but there's no sense in putting two like band related.
Yeah, I understand that.
So IQ Dark Matter is my number 3. Why this album out of all the other albums? First of all, this was my first exposure to IQ the band.
Me too.
In 2004, and the epic on that album, the
Harvest
last
of Souls,
final
yeah.
song, from start to finish, is mind-boggling.
It is. It's true.
Drums are good.
Mm-hmm.
Road of Bones is good. Seventh House is. I love Seventh House a lot, but it wasn't my first album IQ, that would probably be in second place, would be Seventh House. It's kind of a close tie with Dark Matter. But yeah, IQ Dark Matter is my number 3. Peters Nichols vocals are just top notch. The lyrics are top notch. This album's like literally going on 20 years old as of this year, because the first album came out in 2004,
Yeah.
I believe, in the fall, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so.
So
Yes.
yeah,
I wonder if they'll do a real release of that, maybe a remaster. Maybe it's they did something for Subterranea, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's my number 3, Dark Matter IQ.
Yeah, that's great.
Great choice.
Yeah.
It's a great choice.
Yeah. I'm going to substitute. I'm gonna throw the third one in for a different pick. This is gonna throw off a lot of people because I wanted to say Stardust We Are because I love Stardust We Are. It's phenomenal. The epic is amazing. But I'm going to break a billion brains, and I'm going to switch from Stardust We Are to Banks of Eden. Numbers is phenomenal. I love Pandemonium. For Those About to Drown. Oh, man. Oh, so good. Oh, so good. I was about to say Some of No Evil because it's like right there, but I think Banks of Eden is just slightly more concise, just a little bit more. It's their shortest album by far. It's very just to the point. You have Numbers to start off, which is easily one of their best epics.
Yeah.
And then you have For the Love of Gold. I actually very much enjoy too. The bonus disc is very good. But I would say it's the opening of the album and the closing of the album that really stick my love in it. Just a flagpole right there. Very good. It's probably their most consistent listen from start to finish. Dad, you're number 2.
All right. I'll stick with my theme of picking older prog from the 70s, and I will pick Gentle Giant's Octopus.
Ooh, good.
I think I probably could go with any Gentle Giant album, but I'll pick Octopus. I don't know, it's kind of lush and a very more symphonic than some of their other albums.
Yeah.
And so that's my thing. I know they're a bit of a quirky band, but you know, it's a little bit of a. I know nowadays they're very more sort of appreciated than they had been in the past. I think when I first started listening to older prog in the 80s, they were kind of one of the forgotten bands.
Yeah.
People remembered Yes and Genesis and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, but Gentle Giant was kind of a bit of an obscure band. But over time, I think they've become more to be thought of as like one of the most important central bands in the sound, and other bands like, for example, Sparks, Beard, and Echo Lynn have, and even Glass Hammer have taken some of that approach to writing songs and incorporated it into their stuff. So they're kind of I think they're one of the most important bands. So I'll go Gentle Giant, Octopus, number 2.
John, you're second.
Oh boy. Okay. Number 2. We only have 5.
Yeah.
This is kind of tough because if there was to be one honorable mention, I'm going to just mention this and get it out of the way.
I would love to hear your honorable mention.
Excellent High is a 50-minute epic. That would have been an honorable mention.
Ooh.
But number 2, my favorite second number album. I discovered this band when this album came out in 2006. This is a progressive power metal band out of Germany. The singer, I'm probably gonna butcher his name. It's called Andy Kuntz, but it sounds like the other word I'd rather like a okay. Kuntz.
Yeah.
Stick with that. Okay. Yeah. It's a concept album based on the
I think I know what you're gonna say.
Of literature of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas, and the way they do this concept album kind of makes more like a they are like. I do know the singer is Christian, so the concept album is kind of playing on a figure of role, like Jesus Christ Superstar type thing, where they're using Jesus Christ to represent the Cristo and that. They have been my favorite progressive metal band. I prefer them over Dream Theater every day. Now, sorry, don't shoot the messenger, but I love Bond and Applause. Can't wait till their new album comes out next month. Been a diehard fan, but
Man.
that is literally from start to finish. January Sauna's on there, and if you get the bonus track version, the singer does the song Gethsemane off the Jesus Christ Superstar album, and he just nails that. And the number reason why I love Bond and Applause so much is the singer actually does theatrical rock operas in Germany. And he's done like on DVD. I owned a DVD where they do the Book of Daniel, which is kind of like off the Bible, but it's all sung in Latin, and it's like a stage theater type progressive rock album. And I don't remember what it's called, but because it's written in Latin, but it's based on that. This Andy's probably like one of my favorite singers of all times because he does that theatrical thing, like rock operas. I prefer him probably over Arion because Arion does a lot and he does more than one singer, but Andy's just got the voice to just if you ever get to see Andy any of their videos live, you can tell the singer of Bon and Pla is just so good. Now, you don't like prog metal, I can understand, but that's my number 2, Christo by the German progressive power metal band Bon and Pla.
All right. My number 2 is again another substitution. I was going to say A Trick of the Tail by Genesis, but I have since chosen a different album, and I will pick Duke instead. Just to throw everyone off because no one's fun. Duke is generally, I would say, my second favorite Genesis album, but it does have a lot of my favorite moments. The entirety of the Duke suite, I would say, is probably, I mean, it's it's the second epic they ever had, but it was the epic that never happened, I guess, right? But you listen to it, they play it in its entirety live. All 28 minutes of that is just pure progressive rock gold, and I don't know, too overhated in my opinion, but I think from start to finish, you got the Behind the Lines, and you have Hethes, and you have all of those mini songs in there between the Duke suite. You have Please Don't Ask, another great one. And, of course, the wonderful 10 minutes, 11 minutes that is the entirety of the Duke's suite. The Duke's Travels and Duke's End at the end, which is a great way to close off a Genesis album. And probably, I'd say it competes with a lot of the Gabriel and Hackett era Genesis. That's going to trigger a lot of people's a lot of people, eh? Huh. I love that. It's awesome.
Oh, boy.
All right, Dad, number 1.
Well, I'm going to stick with a theme there that you have started, Zoli, but in sticking with my love of 70s prog, I will pick a Genesis album for number 1, but I will pick Wind and Wuthering.
Ooh, nice.
Wow. That's probably one of my second favorite Genesis. That's shocking.
It's good. Very interesting pick. Dad, explain.
Well, you know, I was watching a YouTube video today, the story of Wind and Wuthering. It was so nice. It was very good to see. I mean, they for tax reasons, they started recording or writing and recording in, I think maybe it was Holland.
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying that because they were away from England, it brought in the sort of nostalgia for their home country. And so you can hear that on Wind and Wuthering, that it's a very English sounding album. So it's kind of got a very folky pastoral vibe to it. And it's very much tied to the weather, right? It's all, well, of course, Wind and Wuthering, but you know what I mean? It brings in that English weather feel. And then as well, there's something to be said for the idea that the divide between Steve Hackett and the rest of the band was starting in the recording of that album, that he really wanted to get a certain percentage of his songs, which he was writing a lot of songs, and we all know that Steve Hackett was writing some great material in those days.
Mm.
And he wanted some material, some of it which ended up on Please Don't Touch. He wanted some of those songs on the album, and the other guys rejected the idea of everybody had to write a quarter of the album because there was 4 guys or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so, and then some of the tracks that were written and recorded appeared later on an EP called Spot the Pigeon.
Yeah.
And the YouTube presenter was showing the possibility of perhaps they were considering doing a double album, just like The Lamb. And what would have happened if you'd have put the tracks that were on Spot the Pigeon? And, because the weakest song on Wind and Wuthering is Your Own Special Way. And it's not one of my favorite songs. It's just, it's okay. But I would have preferred what I saw the track listing that this guy was doing on YouTube, with the tracks from Spot the Pigeon. It was really, really good. And they really fit well with the other songs on Wind and Wuthering. But, despite the fact that those songs didn't get on Wind and Wuthering, it's still an absolutely fantastic album. And I think it is sort of the peak of the Genesis sound, and in some ways that's a compliment to Steve Hackett, because in a lot of ways from 1971, from Nursery Crime onwards, without Steve Hackett, it basically doesn't sound like Genesis anymore, right?
I would argue that,
I still love And Then There Were Three, so don't get me wrong. I love And Then There Were Three, and I love Duke.
Trespass. You got to remember Trespass, because that's Anthony Phillips on guitar. His work there is great.
Yeah, but I mean, yes, but as years rolled on, Steve Hackett became an integral player, not just in terms of guitar playing, but in terms of sound and in terms of, and even writing. He was writing some of the parts that were very important to the sound of Genesis. On Wind and Wuthering, you can hear that on Blood on the Rooftops. I mean, that, his and on Quiet Slumbers for the Sleepers in That Quiet Earth wouldn't be the same without his writing, his contributions.
Yeah, I can see that at least.
So I think that's a very defensible album, and Genesis is easy to pick for number 1 for me anyway.
Yeah.
And Wind and Wuthering, it's always been my favorite Genesis album, so I'll stick with that one.
John, yourself, what's your number 1?
Here we go. I only mentioned 170 so far. But this one's not a 70s. But if I had to have a number 170s, just to get this out of the way, Canadian band, Harmonium's second album, which I can't pronounce. Whatever. That
really long album there.
That is probably would be my number 170s prog album of all time. That one's good. But number 1, Zoltán Knows What's Coming.
I think
The Flower Kings, The Sum of No Evil.
Yep.
This album is golden perfection. The hand gestures are all going everywhere. I'm excited to get to this one. You have Love Is the Only Answer. Play that song one more time. My favorite personal song off this album, which I've been trying to get Zoltán to play. Done cover off for about the last 4 to 5 years. It might come eventually. It's The Sum of No Reason. And which makes this even cool is how I met Zoltán himself, because the drummer that's on this album's named Zoltán, and the drummer is also Hungarian. If I'm not mistaken, you got Hungarian.
Yes,
and you also. So divine fate, how we met, where your favorite album of all times has a drummer named Zoltán, and then your best friend you meet is also a drummer, and is also a Flower King fan. So yeah, Something No Evil. Roy Stoltz's guitar solos are all over the charts on his Thomas Modine's keyboards. The drumming is perfection. Why this album over Stardust We Are and everything, I don't know. I just flocked to this album over the years and has resonated.
Yeah.
And it wasn't my introduction to the band at all. My introduction to the band was Flower Power. And to be honest with you, that would probably be my second favorite album of all time by the Flower Kings is Flower Power, because the Garden of Dreams. But
Garden of Dreams is so impossible to argue against.
But Some of No Evil is just when that album came out and I bought it day one and I played it, I was blown away. Like, and
It's really
nothing has topped this album since, except for maybe Transatlantic's 5 album, which is a 92-minute epic. I call that the Sum of No Evil Part 2, even though it's not a Flower Kings album. It's the closest thing to it. But my number one is Sum of No Evil, Flower Kings.
Yeah, good pick.
Yeah, good choice. I like
As,
it.
yeah, it's a really good pick.
And
As for everything,
Joey? I just want to say, I want to echo John's sentiment in that as a keyboard player, Thomas Bodine, absolutely fantastic keyboard player. Love it. Absolutely. He's absolutely great. He's got the style down perfect. And
yeah, my favorite keyboard player of all time. Second would be the guy from Carthage, Anthony Collusion. If you don't know who that is, he's Thomas Bodine 2.0, in my honest opinion.
All right, and because we better switch subjects soon, I will finish off and say my number one. I was debating on switching it out, but I wanted to be consistent, and I wanted to actually be honest here, because as much as I do love metal, I'm going to put in Animals, because Pink Floyd Animals is great. I love the music. The lyrics are fine. I think just from a beginning to end, you have Pigs on the Wing, which is a good folky little tune. You have Dogs, which is just 17 minutes of just pure...
Number one.
Pigs, 3 different ones, Sheep, and then Pigs on the Wing Part 2. It's pretty hard to argue that is I will say, to draw it in the sand, Animals is the best Pink Floyd album in that era. It is. I will listen to Animals over Dark Side any day. Oh, and
I thought it was
here.
going to be my Porcupine Tree. I'm shocked you mentioned Pink Floyd. We won't go there with Pink Floyd. Let's just say I love the Gilmore era better.
Okay, that's fair.
For reasons.
So now, because we have a very juicy subject now, why not we move directly on to the big one? We will move on to subgenres and our takes on that, because we have things to discuss. Dad, would you like to start us off?
Well, Zoltán, I think we were basing our discussion before we started this episode on the idea that the subgenres we're taking that from Prog Archives, right?
Yes. So
not that other people do use the subgenres, but they seem to have sort of almost a standard. Or the most agreed upon list of subgenres, right?
I would like to start this discussion with a question, and I will ask this question to both of you, starting with Dad. Do you think progressive rock subgenres like the ones on Prog Archives are necessary?
I personally don't like them.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do see that there is a benefit in terms of critics and in any type of marketing. If you can say that my band or the band I'm discussing fits into a group of bands that have some similar approach.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you can say that we're doing, I don't know, say they have a category, symphonic prog, and symphonic prog means that you're trying to sound like 70s bands that have woodwind instruments and mellotrons, and I see that may be helpful to the listener to say, well, I like Genesis, so I might like this other band that is doing a similar kind of music.
Yeah.
But I personally don't like the categories. You and I have spoken before, and John will probably appreciate this quite a bit, that, the one that confuses me a lot is the band Haken, which you've shown me, Zoli, and I like a lot of it. And then, is that a prog metal band or is that a heavy prog band? I don't know. I don't get the difference. And I like them a lot. I think they probably should just be called prog and not worry about the subgenres. But
Mm-hmm.
the biggest label I have the problem with is prog metal.
Yeah.
Because as John was mentioning before, there's certain people who don't like prog metal, and I'm one of them. I don't really like any metal at all. I don't like Iron Maiden or anything like that. I don't want to hear it.
Oh,
So every time I hear a
Dang.
band called prog metal, they're always just a metal band that's trying to be fancy, trying to be complicated, and trying to borrow a little bit from prog and be a little fancy. And some of them are okay at it, and most of them just sound like metal bands to me. Just fancy playing metal bands. And I don't like metal, so as soon as I hear something that sounds a little bit like Iron Maiden, then I'm out.
Yeah.
oh boy.
Mm.
So so prog metal maybe helps me out a little bit, just because I know if it says prog metal, I'm just not going to listen. With the exception of Haken, because I actually really like a lot of that stuff.
You
I
might
get-
like it. I doubt it.
But I hear a lot of a General Giant influence there.
Yeah, me too.
And I get that they're also borrowing from some metal bands that they listen to, but
Yeah.
I'm playing in a prog band all the time, and I don't listen to any metal, and I wouldn't borrow anything from that metal. And I also dismiss the idea that Rush is a prog metal band.
Would
mean,
you
they-
consider Riverside prog metal? Are you in the? I mean, you're kind of order.
I kind of like some of the Riverside. I'm not really sure if they're even a prog band, though. I mean, they're just kind of like, it's like sort of like melodic heavy music that borrows a little bit from some kind of moody Pink Floyd set of sensibilities, but are they really prog at all? I don't know. I'm not trying to criticize because, there are other podcasts that have done the very objective point of view of saying, does this band do X, Y, and Z? And then, give them points. Like I think Andy Edwards has done that.
Yes, he has.
The progometer or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Say whether a band is prog. And sometimes a band can have all the elements of prog and then not really fit very much with my sensibilities as an old guy who likes 70s prog. Like, I don't find Dream Theater to be very prog at all. I find them to be a fancy metal band. Just they're mostly interested in doing metal. There's not a lot of prog in there, but that's just me. And I don't like them, so nothing against the players. I think they're all fantastic players. I just don't like what they're playing. It just doesn't touch me in any way, shape, or form. I don't hear Wind and Wuthering anywhere in there. So
No, I understand that.
so that's again, Zoli knows that I don't like prog metal. Always says to me, "Oh, this band probably sounds like Dream Theater." So, and I'm not gonna. Zoli has showed me a lot of the Dream Theater stuff, and I do appreciate that there's good playing. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
And they may technically fit into a definition of fitting in with prog, but I don't really see them as a prog band. I just see them as a metal band who has aspirations to one day be a prog band, but they're not there.
Yeah.
They're doing anything prog. They're not even trying to be prog. They're just trying to sound like the Queensryche from Operation Mindcrime that I listened to back in whatever that was, around 1989 or something like that, which I actually really do like. I like Queensryche for what it is. That was almost would say that I do like metal, but I actually don't. But they're sort of the exception to the rule. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you can always get one band doing something that, generally speaking, you don't like. Like I think they're very good at what they do, and some of it is actually quite good music, and I like it. But even though they fit in with the metal crowd, I just generally don't like that kind of music. All kinds of noisy guitars doesn't appeal to me. So yeah, so I find overall, except for the exclusionary criteria that is prog metal, and it's kind of sad for a band like Haken, because I think that there's a lot of people who don't like prog metal who would probably like them if they weren't told, hey, that's prog metal, you know? So yeah, so there you go. I don't think that the subgenres are all unhelpful. I think they exclude bands that you might otherwise listen to, and I might not listen to Haken if I were told that they were prog metal, because I don't really like the idea of prog metal, and I certainly don't like Dream Theater, which is not to say I hate them. I don't hate it. I just don't. It doesn't appeal to me.
Mm.
So
Yep.
that's my bit.
Yep. I will continue with John. Do you find the subgenres in progressive rock, such as the ones that you can find on Prog Archives, necessary?
Yes and no.
I agree
Okay.
with that. Yes.
Yeah, yes. Okay, because when you're talking from a standpoint where you have subgenres or regular genres in music, okay, prog rock, you have the symphonic, you have the jazz rock fusion, you have the Abbott prog, then you have the neo prog. So if I'm listening to prog and I go on Prog Archives and I want to listen to a symphonic prog album, but I go listen to Magma for an example, and I listen to that, I'm like, this isn't prog, that's Zool, or that's Abbott, or Jazzy. So, in the sense of categorizing everything in a subgenre, and some things, in some ways, it does work. And then, like, if you're trying to get it, if you're in the mood to listen to jazz rock fusion, they classify that into the prog subgenres because it is kind of proggy, because you can fuse. Fusion is just multiple genres of music fused together. So you got rock, and then you have the standard jazz fusion, and then you have the progressive fusion, and then you have prog metal, which he was mentioning. I like prog metal, but I'm very picky about it. And I like the symphonic stuff. I like the stuff that has where the singer is actually very good. Power metal and stuff like that. But we have an oversaturation of prog metal in the market right now. And yeah, Inside Out Records for the last 2 to 3 years, the first quarter of everything they released for the first 3 months, you have the last 2 years, you started off with Riverside, and then Haken did an album in March, and then this year we started off with Caligula's Horse, and then in March we had Whom Gods Destroy, which I recommended to you. Your dad didn't like that. I actually like that because the singer Dino Jalusic won Eurovision, and this guy's been literally compared to Russell Allen meets the next David Coverdale of Whitesnake. The guy's got a really good set of pipes. And when it comes to the metal side of everything on the subgenres, the pipes matter and in prog. And then you have the complex technicality, which is like Dream Theater, which is okay in its own merit, but then you start looking like, I love Ingbe, but I don't want to listen to Ingbe Malmsteen every day of the week. I got to be in the mood for him. And with prog metal, all that flashiness going on, people think that's what prog is supposed to be.
That's my problem too.
And when I look at prog from the subgenre standpoints, there's two forms of prog. You have the formulated version of prog, which we've all grown and accustomed to for years, which got the keyboards, the odd time signatures, the bells and whistles. Then you have progressive rock or progressive music. Progressive music, and this is going to sound stupid. David Bowie was progressive because every album he did had a different signature. Stephen Wilson. Stephen Wilson of Porcupine Tree. I'm not really a big fan of his solo stuff, but every solo album he's done has, except for maybe one or two, he's constantly
different things.
Something different. That to me is the difference between the formulated progressive rock and progressive rock. You have
a good point in that regard, which leads us to another point in that regard, which could be, should those two be considered different? But that can be a totally different topic. I want to get down to my biggest gripe, which is, for example, me being the drummer of Benjamin's Kite and working alongside Dad, we do have the albums on Prog Archives. We do have Antediluvian Euphonies and Ingenious Cacophonies. We are labeled as crossover prog. My only problem is that when you get down to the general consensus of what crossover prog is that you have generally, which is considered classic prog of the 70s, symphonic, eclectic, and then mixing it with the more modern rock, pop, folk sensibilities, and then they call that crossover. Fine, that's great.
RAOR, more or less.
But then you have neo-prog, which is basically by definition taking 70s prog like Genesis and throwing in pop rock sensibilities of that same era. So my question is, when you look at them based on those two things, neo-prog and crossover don't have it's too focusing on the minutia of it at this point. You're focusing on era specific points here, but my only problem is this: if it would make total sense if neo-prog were held as era specific, like you only had Marillion and IQ and Palace and Pendragon all in there in neo-prog, because that was the era, right? But now you have crossover prog, who is like It Bites, and I believe I saw, Steven Wilson's in there as well. I believe I saw Mike Oldfield, which was very interesting. I know Southern Empire is on there, I believe, as well. They're labeled as crossover. And now that leads me to this. Given the fact that we already know these definitions, what is the actual difference between neo-prog and crossover prog? And my because it would make total sense if neo-prog was era-specific, like I said, but then you have a band like The Watch, who was just starting in the 90s and didn't release their first album until around, 2001, 2002? And they are labeled as neo-prog on Prog Archives. So it makes me think, oh, it's not era-specific, so then what is the difference between neo-prog and crossover? You're pigeonholing at that point.
I think one has more keyboard work, whereas the crossover is more lays into like the alternative sound and the post-rock sound, where neo-prog, and anyone hears the word neo, you have a cult following. I'm not listening to it. I don't like the neo sound. And everyone thinks that anything that sounds like IQ and that keyboard sound, because even Genesis would be is a symphonic prog band, but some people will categorize some of their albums as symphonic neo crossover prog. But since they're not 80s, the terminology was termed in the 80s neo. Genesis gets a pass, but any clone band afterwards is labeled neo. And I think the neo terminology comes to, it's just the way the keyboards and the production is. It's less symphonic.
But
and
then
you,
my problem with that is, which I can see, but then why are we labeled as crossover when we don't have that alt-rock sensibility? We're very much more of a keyboard-driven, production-driven band, very much like you were explaining with neo-prog.
It's probably because you have more of an 80s AOR sound to the band's sound, so that would be considered probably the crossover reference right there. And you're not like really like more vastly like a symphonic. So they're categorizing you probably on the crossover because of the 80s AOR aspect. That's why.
I can see that with a handful of tracks, yeah. But then again, if that's the case, then why aren't we pigeonholing songs like "More Fool Me" off of "Selling England" or "Seven Stones" off of "Nursery Crime," which are both, I wouldn't say, to the textbook of progressive rock songs. Maybe not Seven Stones. No, Harlequin. That's very just psychedelic folk or just folk. And "More Fool Me" is just a very light rock folk song. Not prog in my mind. But again, that's just pigeonholing again. You're putting a classification on something that probably is too. You're focusing too much on the minutia of it at that point. I'd say
Pretty much.
it's too much just focusing on the tiniest of little details. And if you could broaden these terms, I think you could easily take out 10 of those subgenres on Prog Archives, and it would still work just as well.
I mean, if I had to categorize y'all's music, I mean, I wouldn't call it crossover. I would call it a mix of 80s AOR with prog in it. I mean, a prog. It's not pop.
No,
it's got. It's symphonic. The epics y'all do is symphonic, and the shorter songs do have that 80s sound to it.
Yeah, sometimes we do that. Yeah,
it's not. It is what it is. You know,
it is.
It's a product of our environment that we grew up in, right?
Yes, that is about right.
I mean, the guys in Benjamin's Kite grew up with Rush on the radio, and and bands like Saga,
yeah,
and being a big influence.
Yeah.
So you're just influenced by those bands because that's what you hear.
True. It's very, very, very good point in that regard.
Right? Like it's not like we're trying to sound like stuff like that, but it's just that you hear what people do and you think, okay, well, that was cool, and I can do some of the, you know what I mean? Like it's part of it is you're just in your environment, and you're just so used to things sounding like that, and that's what and some of it you like, and some of it you don't like, but it creeps in one way or another. If you're where bands are a product of their time and their environment, that's the way it is.
Yeah. I've noticed that we only have a few more minutes here, so why not we get down to our final closing thoughts, and then we'll say our goodbyes. All right. So how would we like to close this off? How would we like to close off the subject, Dad?
Subject of the subgenres?
Yeah. If you have one more point you can make it.
Yeah, I don't find them very helpful for me, and I kind of ignore them. Mm-hmm. If I was looking for new bands every day, it may help me a little bit, but I'm not looking for new bands every day. Like, for the most part, I count upon you and John to introduce me to new good stuff. I'm counting on you guys to search it out for on a daily basis. I'm listening to things that I already know that I like. So
yeah, I need some new stuff too. John, yourself, anything you would like to close up with?
With the subgenre thing, I like that it does exist, because if I'm in a mood to listen to jazz rock fusion or neo prog or symphonic prog, I can put my music CDs in that kind of category and then pull it out based on that. I'm not sitting there going through alphabetical order. I do my music by year, and then what I do within that crate of year, I separate it by this is the jazz section I like. Then I put a border divider in, that's how I do it. Yes, it does has its merits when you're wanting in the mood to listen to a particular main genre. Like, you have the main prog, and then you have the subgenres. So if you're in the mood for prog folk, you know where the folk is. If you're in the mood for the jazz, you have the jazz. If you're in the mood for the symphonic, if you're in the mood for the metal or whatever, you know where it is. But at the end of the day, I feel a lot the people just get way too obsessed of trying to compartmentalize everything into 30 subgenres when really you only maybe need 5 to 7 top.
True. Where for me, I will close off and say, I like the subgenres, but overall, a little too much. And just concise them a little bit more, make them a little bit more, pack them down and compress them a little bit. Give us a little bit less, because there's too much. Anyway, there's a few seconds left. I will say my goodbyes. Everyone want to say your goodbyes?
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like, share, and subscribe. We will be doing these more very frequently and very soon. Thank you very much. And as always, we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.